I'm Abigail.
And I'm Keith.
And this is the Global Treasures Podcast. We'll cover different World Heritage sites each episode.
These sites have been identified as having universal cultural or natural significance
that is so exceptional that it transcends national boundaries and is of importance to present and future generations.
There are 1,199 sites across the world, with more being added every year.
We'll spend each episode exploring the history, legends, travel tips, and so much more.
Welcome to Season 2, where we'll explore the 45 sites that UNESCO added in 1979.
Today, we'll be exploring forts and castles in Ghana, formerly known as the Gold Coast. This UNESCO World Heritage Site consists of 3 castles and 15 forts that were erected between 1482 and 1786 along the coast of Ghana, spanning a distance of approximately 500 kilometers or 310 miles from Kedah in the east to Bayin in the west.
The 3 castles included in this UNESCO site are the Cape Coast, St. George's del Mina, and Christiansborg at Osu, Accra. St. George's del Mina is particularly notable for being the oldest site, as it was the first trading post built by Europeans on the Gulf of Guinea. It's also the oldest European building built below the Sahara Desert and one of the oldest European buildings to have ever been built outside of Europe. In addition to the castles, there are 15 forts that make up this site. These include Good Hope at Sanya Baraku, Patience at Appam, Amsterdam at Abanzi, St. Jago at Elmina, San Sebastian at Shama, Metal Cross at Dixcove, St. Anthony at Axum, Orange at Sekondi, Groot Frederiksborg at Princetown, William at Cape Coast, William at Anominabu, Victoria at Cape Coast, Usher at Ushertown, Accra, James at Jamestown, and Accra and Apollonia at Bayin. Oof, that was quite a bit of them.
Unfortunately, some of these sites have fallen into ruin over time. There are 11 sites that are now ruins, including the English Fort at British Comenda, Vernon at Pram Pram, and Frederiksborg at Amanful Cape Coast, as well as 8 others.
These castles and forts were built, occupied, and then altered at different times by traders from various European countries, including Portugal, Spain, Denmark, Sweden, Holland, Germany, and Britain. All of the really powerful empires at the time that were interested in exploration. They initially served the gold trade of the European chartered nations, but later played a significant part in developing the slave trade. These sites also played a role in the history of the Americas and, in the 19th century, in the suppression of that slave trade.
The basic design of the forts consists of a large square or rectangle with outer components such as 4 bastions, batteries, or towers at the corners. The inner components include buildings of 2 or 3 stories, with or without towers, an enclosure or courtyard.
St. George's del Mina, built in 1482 as mentioned before, is one of the oldest European buildings outside of Europe. The historic town of Elmina is believed to be the location of the first point of contact between Europeans and sub-Saharan Africans. For 4 centuries, the castles and forts acted like a shopping street for West Africa, where traders from Europe's most important maritime nations came to exchange their goods with African traders, some of whom came from far into the interior of Africa.
The Forts and Castles site in Ghana is seen as a unique collective historical monument that not only represents the evils of the slave trade, but also nearly 4 centuries of pre-colonial Afro-European commerce on the basis of equality, rather than the colonial basis of inequality. These sites represent the continuing history of European-African encounters over 5 centuries and serve as the starting point of the African diaspora.
It's worth noting that the forts in Ghana are far easier to visit and are better preserved than the slave forts in other neighboring countries. This is due to Ghana's better tourism infrastructure and the resources it devotes to cultural preservation, which we'll talk about later. Let's dive a little further into the history of these sites so we can get a better idea of why UNESCO sees this as culturally significant enough to have included it on the list of sites in the 2nd year.
Before we dive into the history, it's essential to understand the rich cultural background of the region. Ghana had peoples who were farmers, hunters, potters, and traders. Evidence of animal rearing, crop farming, hunting, and pottery is abundant. Old Ghana had rich and complex varieties of languages, culture, and wealth.
By 800 AD, Ghana was already a thriving center for trade and commerce. In fact, by 1070, it was considered one of the most powerful empires in the world due to its wealth and military prowess. It wasn't until the 15th century that Europeans first came to Ghana to trade, bringing with them clothes, guns, gunpowder, alcohol, metal knives, mirrors, and beads in exchange for gold, land, and ivory.
So during the colonial period in Ghana, European-style coastal forts and castles were built between the 15th and 19th centuries. These buildings were mostly constructed by the Portuguese, Dutch, and British, and they were linked to the trading routes established by the Portuguese. These forts and castles acted as an important marketplace for the gold and slave trades.
Interestingly, the Kumasi fort in the Ashanti region was originally built by an Asante king in imitation of these European forts. Initially, the forts were used to store gold and other resources. However, as the demand for workers at American plantations grew, the slave trade became more lucrative. This resulted in the transatlantic slave trade, which supplied slaves to the Americas and the Caribbean.
As a result of this shift in trade, the forts and castles along the coast became holding points for the slaves. The once thriving centers of commerce and cultural exchange were transformed into places of immense human suffering and injustice. The legacy of this dark period in history can still be felt today, and the Forts and Castles UNESCO site serves as a reminder of both the rich cultural heritage of Ghana and the tragic consequences of the slave trade.
And just in case you find yourself visiting the site, here's a few factoids that will make you smarter than your average tourist. For instance, the Cape Coast Castle built by the Swedes in 1653 was actually later taken over by the British and served as the seat of the British colonial government in Ghana until the country gained independence in 1957. Today, it houses the West African Historical Museum. The Christian-Borg Castle in Osu, Accra, has a unique history. It was built by the Danes in the 1660s and has served as the seat of government for many nations, including Denmark, Portugal, the Akwamu Empire, Britain, and finally Ghana. It's actually currently the presidential palace of Ghana. Now that we covered what the site is, a bit of the history, and some of the lesser-known facts, let's actually talk about getting there. I know this is not the most visited UNESCO site for sure. Since it's so spread out, I'm sure that visiting the whole site would present itself as a challenge. So Abigail, this is your area. What'd you find out?
So there isn't a whole lot to report here because, like you said, there either isn't a whole lot to see due to certain areas having fallen into disrepair, or it's just really tough to get to the various sites. Like you said, it's time-consuming because all of these sites are spread out along the coast. There are Cape Coast tours that take you to Elmina and others in that area, but otherwise, you'll have to try to rent a car or get some sort of shuttle to get to see them all. And I would say if you want to see the various forts and castles, you really should book a tour through a vetted site. So let me backtrack. You'll want to fly into Kotoka International Airport and then take either a taxi or a shuttle or again rent a car so you can go to the sites. If you're going to go with a taxi, I'd recommend asking the company you book your tour through to see if they have recommendations for companies to use to ensure you're getting a legitimate service. In terms of thinking about what to pack and what the weather is like, the rainiest season is between May and June, and temperatures ebb between the high 70s to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so it gets hot.
So with all the history of empires influencing Ghana, and the last one of these being the English, I'm guessing the language of the country is still English. I'm not sure, but is that the case?
Yes, it is actually, and I was personally surprised by that.
Okay, and did you find anything on the best place to stay to be sort of centralized to visit these spread out sites?
There are a couple hotels in Cape Coast, which is actually a World Heritage site itself, and is the home to over 30 festivals annually. So you might want to see what festivals are being held when you visit.
All right, everybody knows I'm always going to ask about food. I'm super curious with the number of cultures that have moved in and out of this region and the culinary influences that must have stayed behind and got assimilated. So, what amazing dishes did you find out about that we should try?
In terms of food, the Fanti people of Ghana are known for their unique use of fish in dishes because they're excellent fishermen and have techniques to preserve the fish down pat. A few examples of dishes that incorporate this expertise include okra stew, which is usually a host of different types of fish like salmon and shellfish, along with vegetables and a chicken or seafood stock. Another dish is fante kiki, which is made from cornmeal and usually eaten with dishes like okra stew as a side.
Once again, these sound like some great dishes I'd love to try. All right, so you also often look into the challenges of preserving these sites. I know Ghana has a pretty good infrastructure, especially when it comes to tourism, so I'm hoping that we're in good shape on this one. What did you learn about the preservation of these buildings? The ones that are left, I mean.
The main issues here are threefold, so I'll kind of break them down into categories. The first being environmental or weather-related issues. Ghana has a tropical climate and experiences strong winds, intense rain, and a caustic, salty atmosphere due to its close proximity to the Atlantic Ocean. As a result, these factors physically wear away at the buildings. Also, sea levels are changing, and as a result, some buildings are affected by the encroachment of the sea and the erosion of the ground on which the structures are located. The second issue revolves around the fact that none of the sites included have well-defined boundaries, so other homes or buildings have been constructed around them. As a result, pollution of the surroundings and illegal quarrying of sand and soil around the forts is starting to undermine the stability of the structures as well. In terms of the pollution I mentioned, people dump their garbage and contaminate the beaches around the forts. It's also unhygienic and often ends up in the ocean, which is bad for the sea creatures who might eat that garbage. Finally, much of the above is happening because this site doesn't get a whole lot of funding to provide regular upkeep. There is some minor funding from UNPD and USAID, but most of the upkeep is paid for by the government of Ghana. So there's a true need for more funding to be deployed to prevent these incredible forts and castles from collapsing, so future generations can continue to visit these sites. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Global Treasures podcast. You can check us out on YouTube and TikTok.
Thanks so much for joining us. Another quick word about us. Abigail and I truly believe what we're doing to spread the word of these UNESCO sites and can't wait to share each of these with you. If you happen to also think this is important, consider leaving us a 5-star written review with a message saying why. This helps others who may not even know about this program of World Heritage Sites find this podcast and learn of these amazing areas. It also lets providers know that people find value in what we're doing here. So thank you. We know it takes time to write these. We value every one that's already been left, and we can't wait to get more. We're so grateful to each and every one of our listeners who spread the word. We can't wait to see you next time when we take you to the Grand Canyon in the United States.